Daniel Reynolds had given 25 years of his life to Elite Marketing Group. He had been there when the company was nothing more than a mid-tier agency struggling for recognition. He had stayed through the long nights, the impossible deadlines, the last-minute client changes that sent everyone into a frenzy. He had built campaigns that defined brands, that made companies household names. And now, he was being thrown aside like yesterday's draft. Daniel sat in the conference room, across from Megan Wilson, the company's new HR director. She was 35, sharp, polished, and utterly detached. To her right sat the CEO, a man Daniel had once respected, before he decided that fresh faces mattered more than experience. Megan folded her hands neatly on the table. "Daniel, we appreciate everything you've done for EMG over the years. But as you know, we're moving in a new direction. Our clients are younger, more dynamic, and we need a team that reflects that energy." Daniel remained silent. He had seen this coming. For months, he had noticed how meetings that once required his input now took place without him. How major clients he had personally cultivated were suddenly reassigned to others. How Jake Peterson, a 28-year-old junior creative, had begun appearing in meetings that were far above his pay grade. The writing had been on the wall. The only question had been when. The CEO leaned forward, offering a well-practiced look of regret. "Of course, we want to make this transition as smooth as possible for you. We've put together a generous severance package, 6 months' pay, extended benefits. And we'd appreciate it if you signed this non-compete agreement." Daniel glanced at the thick folder Megan slid across the table. He already knew what was inside, a polite death sentence. His name would disappear from EMG. His achievements would be quietly repackaged as team efforts. Jake Peterson, the fresh-faced rising star, would take over the accounts Daniel had spent years cultivating. Megan smiled, as if expecting gratitude. "We trust you'll find this arrangement fair." Daniel finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're replacing me with Jake, aren't you?" There was a brief hesitation, just enough for him to know he was right. Then Megan's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jake represents the direction we're moving toward. He brings fresh ideas. A younger perspective." Daniel almost laughed. Jake Peterson's greatest innovation was repackaging old ideas and calling them new. The kid had never closed a major deal in his life. But Daniel didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't ask for reconsideration. Instead, he did something that deeply unsettled both Megan and the CEO. He smiled. It was a slow, knowing smile, the kind that suggested he knew something they didn't. He slid the folder back across the table, untouched. "I'll have my lawyer review it." The CEO exhaled, clearly relieved that Daniel was taking this so well. "We appreciate your professionalism, Daniel. We know this isn't easy, but we believe this is best for the future of EMG." Daniel stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Oh, I have no doubt this will change the future of EMG." He extended his hand. Megan hesitated, then shook it. As he walked toward the door, he paused, just for a second. Then, without turning back, he said 3 words that sent a chill down the CEO's spine. "You'll regret this." And then, Daniel Reynolds walked out of Elite Marketing Group for the last time. But not in defeat. Because unlike them, he knew what was coming next. "Now tell me, if you were Daniel, what would you do next? Would you walk away and let them be? Or would you make sure they regret it?" Drop a comment below. Also, where are you listening from? I love seeing how far our stories reach, so comment your country down below. And if you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe to EN True Tales so you don't miss what happens next. Because Daniel? He's not done yet. And by Monday morning, EMG will wish they had never underestimated him. Now, let's see how he sets his plan in motion. Daniel stepped out into the crisp morning air, the weight of 25 years at EMG lifting off his shoulders like an old coat he no longer needed. He wasn't angry. No, anger was for people who didn't see it coming. And Daniel? He had seen this coming a mile away. As he walked toward his car, he pulled out his phone and opened an email draft he had prepared 2 months ago. With a single tap, he hit send. The subject line? It's time. Within minutes, responses started rolling in. Short, simple confirmations from people who had been waiting for this moment just as much as he had. One of them stood out. Your office is ready. Let's make them regret it. Daniel smirked. By the time EMG realized what was happening, it would be far too late. He slid into his car, started the engine, and took one last look at the building he had dedicated half his life to. Then he pulled away, not as a man who had been fired, but as a man on a mission. Because while EMG had been busy cutting out the old, they had made one critical mistake. They forgot that experience is irreplaceable. And now? Daniel Reynolds was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. Daniel arrived at a sleek, glass-paneled building in the heart of downtown, a building that, as of this morning, housed Reynolds Creative Solutions. He stepped out of his car and looked up at the third-floor office space, a sharp contrast to the towering corporate headquarters of EMG. But this wasn't about size. It was about strategy. Daniel entered the building and took the elevator up, stepping into a modern, minimalist office space, walls lined with white boards, desks arranged in a collaborative open layout, and a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A woman in a sharp navy suit approached, her face lighting up. "Boss," she greeted. "Claire," Daniel said with a nod. Claire Bennett had been his right hand at EMG, a brilliant strategist who had resigned 3 weeks ago. She wasn't the only one. 3 other ex-EMG employees were already seated at their desks, waiting for his arrival. "Everything is set," Claire said, walking beside him. "Phones, email servers, branding. We're ready to go." Daniel smirked. "And the clients?" She handed him a tablet. "Exactly as predicted." Daniel scrolled through the list. Lux Tech, Global Retail, Horizon Airlines, Metropolitan Bank, Fresh Start Beverages. 5 of EMG's biggest accounts. 5 accounts that, as of today, were up for renegotiation. Daniel looked up. "And their contacts?" Claire grinned. "Waiting for your call." He set the tablet down and took a deep breath. This was it. While EMG had been busy celebrating their fresh new direction, Daniel had been preparing his own move, cultivating relationships, studying client contracts, pinpointing weaknesses in EMG's structure. And now? Now it was time to strike. He walked into the conference room, opened his laptop, and dialed the first number. "Larry, it's Daniel Reynolds. Hope you're doing well." A pause. Then, on the other end of the line, a relieved sigh. "Daniel. You have no idea how happy I am to hear your voice." Daniel leaned back in his chair, listening intently. On the other end of the line, Larry Whitmore, CEO of Lux Tech, exhaled heavily. "I was hoping you'd call, Daniel," Larry admitted. "Word on the street is EMG let you go." "What the hell were they thinking?" Daniel smirked. "They weren't." Larry chuckled. "No kidding. Look, I won't waste your time, I was already having doubts about their direction." "The new team?" "They're inexperienced. And frankly, I don't trust them to handle Lux Tech's next campaign." Daniel's fingers drummed lightly against the desk. "So you're looking for alternatives?" There was a brief pause. Then Larry's voice dropped, almost conspiratorial. "If you can match EMG's pricing, I'd rather work with you." Daniel's smirk deepened. "Larry, let's be honest. You didn't work with EMG because they were cheap, you worked with them because they delivered results. And you know as well as I do, the only reason they got those results was because of me." Larry laughed. "Damn right. All right, Daniel, send me a proposal. If it's solid, we'll talk numbers. Give me an hour." As soon as the call ended, Daniel turned to Claire. "Lux Tech is in." Her eyes widened. That's EMG's biggest client. If they leave, it's going to send shockwaves. Good, Daniel said, already dialing another number. One by one, he reached out to 4 more CEOs. And one by one, they all said the same thing. They weren't happy with EMG's new leadership. They didn't trust a team that prioritized trends over experience. They wanted Daniel. By the end of the day, he had secured 4 out of 5 clients, with the final one, Fresh Start Beverages, requesting an in-person meeting. How soon can we get to San Francisco? Daniel asked. Claire checked her calendar. First flight in the morning. Daniel nodded. Book it. Then, as an afterthought, he added, make sure it's first class. I want EMG to know exactly how well I'm doing when they see my boarding pass. Claire laughed. I like the way you think. That night, as Daniel closed his laptop, he checked his phone. A message from a former colleague at EMG flashed on the screen. Megan's in full panic mode. EMG just realized they're losing LuxTech. Jake Peterson looks like he's about to throw up. Daniel smiled to himself. Perfect. Daniel stepped off the plane at San Francisco International Airport, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored navy suit. Claire walked beside him, scrolling through her tablet. Fresh Start Beverages is expecting us at noon. Their CEO, Martin Gates, personally cleared his schedule for this meeting. Daniel nodded. Good. That means he's seriously considering making the switch. Claire smirked. Or he just wants to see EMG sweat a little longer. Daniel chuckled. Either way, we'll give him a show. By the time they arrived at Fresh Start's corporate headquarters, Daniel had already run through every possible angle of this meeting. He knew their past campaigns, their challenges, and most importantly, what EMG had been failing to deliver. As they stepped into the boardroom, Martin Gates greeted them with a firm handshake. He was a sharp-eyed executive in his early 50s, a man who valued strategy over flash. Daniel, Martin said, gesturing for them to sit. I have to say, I didn't expect to see you back in the game so soon. Daniel smiled. Neither did EMG. Martin laughed. I heard. Megan called me twice this week, practically begging me to commit to another year with them. And? Daniel asked, leaning back. Martin folded his hands. I told her I was weighing my options. Daniel's expression didn't change, but he knew what that meant. Fresh Start was already halfway out the door. Martin exhaled, studying Daniel. Look, I'll be honest. I don't care about office politics. What I care about is whether you can deliver a better campaign than EMG. Can you? Daniel leaned forward, sliding a thick presentation folder across the table. Inside was everything Fresh Start needed to see: market data, targeted demographics, and most importantly, a campaign that spoke directly to their consumers. I don't just think I can do better, Daniel said. I know I can. And unlike EMG, I'll be personally overseeing your account. No middlemen. No junior execs trying to prove themselves. Just me and my team, people who actually know what they're doing. Martin flipped through the pages, nodding as he took in the details. Then, after a moment, he closed the folder and smiled. You just made my decision very easy. Daniel stayed silent, waiting. Then Martin extended his hand. Let's make it official. Daniel shook it, sealing the 5th and final deal. Claire barely contained her grin as they walked out of the building. That's it. We have them all. Daniel exhaled, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. Now, he said, sliding on his sunglasses, let's see how EMG handles losing half their revenue overnight. That evening, as they boarded their return flight, Daniel checked his phone. A new message from his insider at EMG flashed on the screen. Megan just called an emergency board meeting. They're freaking out. Daniel smirked. Good. Megan Wilson sat at the head of the EMG boardroom table, gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across from her, the CEO looked pale, his usual arrogance replaced by a cold sweat. The emergency board meeting had been called at dawn. Right after the news broke, 5 of their biggest clients had officially pulled out. Half their revenue gone. And every single client had gone to the same man. Daniel Reynolds. Megan swallowed hard as she scrolled through the headlines that had flooded industry news overnight. Reynolds Creative Solutions strikes again, EMG loses 5 major accounts in a single week. Industry icon Daniel Reynolds resurfaces, and he's not playing nice. Elite Marketing Group faces unprecedented client exodus. Can they survive? Her phone buzzed endlessly, reporters, investors, furious clients demanding explanations. The CEO finally spoke, his voice tight. How the hell did this happen? Megan forced herself to stay calm. We underestimated him, she admitted. We thought we could replace him with fresh talent. We thought clients would stay for the brand. But Daniel was the reason they stayed. Silence. Then one of the board members leaned forward. So what do we do now? Megan hesitated. She had only one move left, and she hated it. But there was no other way. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts. And then, for the first time since firing him, she dialed Daniel Reynolds' number. The line rang twice before he answered. His voice was calm. Controlled. Unbothered. Megan. She clenched her jaw. Daniel, we need to talk. A pause. Then, a quiet chuckle. You're calling me for a meeting? Megan closed her eyes. Yes. Let me guess, Daniel continued smoothly. You suddenly realized that the fresh face strategy wasn't such a great idea? Her grip on the phone tightened. Daniel, please. This isn't personal. It's business. Funny, Daniel mused. That's exactly what you told me when you fired me. Megan exhaled, struggling to keep her voice steady. Are you willing to meet or not? Another pause. Then Daniel's voice dropped, filled with mock amusement. You know what, Megan? Sure. Let's talk. Click. He had hung up. Megan stared at her phone, feeling an unease she hadn't felt in years. Because the way he said it. It didn't sound like a negotiation. It sounded like he was about to make her regret ever calling. Megan arrived at the Sterling Room, an exclusive, high-end restaurant known for its private business meetings and high-stakes negotiations. She had picked the place carefully, neutral ground, no ties to EMG, no connections to Daniel. Yet when she walked in, she realized her first mistake. Daniel was already seated in the best booth in the house, sipping a glass of whiskey, looking as composed as ever. He wasn't the one waiting for her. She was the one walking into his territory. Megan took a slow breath and approached the table, forcing a polite smile. Daniel. He looked up, expression unreadable, then gestured to the seat across from him. Megan. She sat down, pulling out a folder. Let's get to the point. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh? No small talk? No, how have you been? I'm hurt. Megan ignored the sarcasm and slid the folder across the table. This is our offer. We're prepared to reinstate you as Senior Vice President of Creative Strategy, at double your previous salary. Full control over the accounts, expanded authority. We know you're valuable, and we're ready to acknowledge that now. Daniel didn't even touch the folder. Instead, he leaned back and smirked. Interesting. And what happens to Jake Peterson? Megan hesitated. He's stepping down. Daniel chuckled. Ah. So the golden boy wasn't so golden after all? Her jaw tightened. Daniel, let's be serious. EMG is in trouble, and we need you back. The board understands their mistake. This is a real offer. Daniel exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers on the table. You want me to fix the mess you created? To clean up after your terrible decisions? Megan tried to keep her voice steady. We're giving you the recognition you deserve. Isn't that what you wanted? Daniel's eyes darkened. No, Megan. What I wanted was respect when it actually mattered. Not when it was convenient for you. Silence. Then Megan did something she never thought she'd do. She swallowed her pride. Daniel, she said quietly. We need you. For the first time in her career, she wasn't in control of the negotiation. But Daniel? He was. He reached forward, pushed the folder back to her, and smiled. I don't think you understand, Megan, he said. I don't need you. Megan's breath hitched. Daniel leaned in slightly. You fired me because you thought I was replaceable. But here's the thing, I wasn't. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked down at her. I built your empire. And now? I'm watching it burn. Megan's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. Daniel placed a crisp $100 bill on the table, covering the cost of his drink. Consider this my final contribution to EMG, he said smoothly. You're gonna need every penny. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Megan alone, staring at the contract that would never be signed. She had gambled everything, and lost. And Daniel Reynolds? He had already won. 1 month later. Daniel leaned back in his corner office, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline was the same. The city bustled with life. But for him? Everything had changed. Reynolds Creative Solutions was now the fastest-growing agency in the industry. The headline said it all. Reynolds Creative surges to #1, EMG's downfall continues. The man they fired is now running the show. Elite Marketing Group struggles to recover from mass client exodus. Daniel sipped his whiskey, flipping through an email. Breaking news, Megan Wilson has officially been removed as chief of HR at EMG. He wasn't surprised. Her failure was too public, too humiliating. The board had no choice but to let her go. A second email followed. EMG CEO announces resignation, company in full crisis mode. Daniel exhaled slowly. It was over. EMG had spent decades building itself into an empire. And in less than a month, he had undone it. His assistant, Claire, stepped into the office with a smirk. Just got a call from the industry conference board. They want you as the keynote speaker next month. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Me? Not EMG? Claire grinned. Nope. You're the name everyone wants to hear. Daniel chuckled. 1 year ago, EMG had barely acknowledged his presence at these events. Now? They weren't even invited. He closed his laptop and stood, glancing out the window. Directly across the street, EMG's offices were a mess. Employees shuffled in and out, their faces tense. A reminder of what happens when a company forgets who built it. Claire handed him an envelope. One last thing. A letter from EMG's board. Daniel opened it. A formal request to meet. A desperate attempt to salvage what was left. He smiled, folded the letter neatly, and dropped it in the trash. Some doors don't deserve to be reopened. As he poured himself another drink, he let out a slow, satisfied breath. They had fired him for a fresh face. And now, that same fresh face was drowning in failure. Meanwhile, he was at the top. Exactly where he belonged. And that's how Daniel turned the tables on the company that underestimated him. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Daniel made the right choice by walking away? Or should he have crushed EMG even further? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you loved this story, press 2 in the comments. If you think it could have ended differently, press 7. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to EN True Tales so you never miss another epic story of revenge, justice, and redemption. Because trust me, there are plenty more where this came from.